Welcome into the final Climate Friday newsletter of the month of January. Finally, a taste of winter with some accumulating snow and bitterly cold temperatures. So in this week's edition, we are going to break down the winter so far, where we stand as far as snowfall. After a record-setting December, you may be wondering, are we caught up yet? Or do we still have some ground to make up as far as snow and cold temperatures? We're going to answer those questions and break down the data, looking at both snowfall and temperatures, what we've seen so far this winter, and also where we are headed as we kick off the month of February. So let's break down the graphics and the information here. A snowfall update. If you're not already subscribed, you can do so on WTOL11.com and also on all of our streaming platforms. January snowfall so far, it is below average. Even though we finally did get a taste of wintry weather, our January snowfall is still shy of 8 inches of snow. And statistically speaking, January is the snowiest month of the calendar year. In a normal January, we get a little over 1 foot of snow accumulation, 12.3 inches. That is our normal January snowfall. And looking at our snowfall to date, we're about 1.5 to 2 inches below where we should be, with about 7.6 inches of snowfall this January so far. Now, of course, December started off without any measurable snowfall, and seasonally speaking, we are well below average. Only 8.5 inches has fallen this entire winter season so far, and that puts us a significant 9 inches below normal. Normally, through today's date, the 26th of January, we have 17.5 inches on the ground, and we are well below average so far this winter, and that is largely due to the month of December. We broke down in depth over the Climate Friday newsletter, talking about the record warmth that month, and also tied for the record least snowiest in terms of snowfall for December. January is a little bit closer to average, even though we are somewhat below normal. We're at least starting to dip into that deficit and make up for lost time. Now, last year really wasn't much different. Through January 26th, last January only had 6.8 inches on the ground over the course of the month, and this January through the 26th, slightly below average for sure, but a little more snow than last year. You can compare 7.6 to 6.8 last season. Now, recent January snowfall really has been fairly similar to what we saw a year ago, in the sense that we got a little bit of wintry weather, but honestly, not that much compared to what you would expect. Last January, we ended the month with 7.9 inches of accumulation, and that was only 64% of our normal average, 64% of that 12.3 figure, which is what we typically see during the month of January. Now, it's not just Toledo, it's not just Northwest Ohio and southeastern Michigan in this snowfall deficit, but a good portion of the region is also lacking in the snowfall department. Looking at a number of major Ohio cities and the snowfall, where it stacks up, you'll notice all these Ohio cities are below the 10-inch snowfall mark. The city of Cleveland at 9.5 inches, Columbus 5.0, Cincy 4.6, same for Mansfield, and Akron, Ohio is at 7.5. Now, some of those eastern Ohio cities are notorious for getting more snowfall, so let's compare this month's snowfall versus normal. Toledo is about 2 inches below average. Cleveland actually close to 5 inches below average in the snowfall department. Columbus minus 2.3. Cincinnati a little over an inch below average. Mansfield, of all those big Ohio cities, actually has the biggest snowfall deficit, over half a foot below average, and the city of Akron is 2.7 inches below average. So pick your spot on the map. The entire Buckeye State is lacking in terms of snowfall, and here's that visually in graphical form. Of course, eastern Ohio does get a little more snow, but Cleveland's still in a snowfall deficit, even though some of the snow belt region has finally started to pick up some lake effect. Toledo is in a snowfall deficit there with 7.6, and down towards central and southern Ohio, you don't quite get as much snow in Cincinnati and Columbus, but there are also snowfall deficits to overcome in the central and southern part of the state. Now, we really haven't gotten that big storm so far this winter. Those of you who call yourself snow lovers might be waiting for that one. Our biggest single-day snowfall of the season, only 2.5 inches. That happened on January 12th, and even that one really not that much in the grand scheme of things. Our second biggest snow of the year, barely a dusting, 1.5 inches, and that is the biggest reason we're so far behind in the hole in terms of snowfall. We just haven't gotten any significant sizable snowstorm. It's more so been smaller snow accumulations that have gradually tried to add up. So that's snowfall. What about temperatures? Where do we stand this month and this winter as a whole? Of course, we had a very mild start to the month of January. That kicked off the month with above average temperatures. The middle of the month, as you remember from recent weeks, did turn frigid, and January as a whole is fairly close to average. Those two almost almost balance each other out like a teeter-totter. We are minus 1.5 compared to normal in the temperature department. Our January average so far is 26 degrees. So yes, it is slightly below average, but if you stay tuned to that WTOL 11 10-day forecast, what you're going to see is we actually start to ramp the roller coaster back up again, and that January average is likely to add on a few degrees. So we very well could end this month pretty close to normal, even though that doesn't quite tell the whole story. What I mean by that is you may remember those frigid single-digit to sub-zero temperature readings that balance the scale in the other direction. Starting things off with this very cold 4-day stretch from January 14th through January 17th, those overnight and morning low temperatures last week, 0 degrees, -2, 4, and 4. Quite the cold stretch of weather, but not quite balanced out by the warm days that we have had thus far this January. Overall, very mild conditions are in the forecast. This weather map takes you on a 10-day trend and beyond through the start of February. And one of the things you'll notice is that that weather pattern is going to flip back to some more mild conditions expected. We're going to turn warmer once again. A milder weather pattern returns for the final days of January and into the start of February as well. And in terms of how warm is it going to be? Well, you're going to see a number of days in the 40s in that 10-day forecast. You are also going to see some days that even approach the mid to upper 40s in the temperature department. Part of that simply has to do with this El Nino weather pattern that we are stuck in. And you may remember December, it was damp, it was mild, and it was full of above average days in the temperature department. If you look at the update on El Nino, which characterized by warmer than normal equatorial Pacific waters, we are still keeping an eye on the evolution of this weather pattern. And what we're seeing is that conditions are unrelenting, at least for the next several months. We're going to stay in this El Nino pattern. Those blue colors on the map show you cooler than normal conditions. A few areas out in the Atlantic are cooler than normal right now. And if you look out towards the west coast, mild waters shown by those red and orange colors on this weather map. We are still keeping a close eye on the change in temperatures of some of those waters. And you'll notice in the western Pacific out there, those very dark, vivid reds and oranges, that shows you waters that have gotten even warmer in the last several weeks. So the overall projection is that those waters are going to stay warmer than average. Now, how is climate change linked to all this? Well, of course, the fact that December was record-setting, that is a trend that has become much more common in recent years. December is the fastest warming month when you look at the entire calendar year. On average, warming by 3.1 degrees, simply looking at the last decade versus this one. In other words, in just one decade of weather data, that's how much December has warmed up. By January has gotten 2 degrees warmer. So to be fair, it hasn't quite been affected by climate change as much as the month of December. Not as big of a change as December, but still a notable one nonetheless. And that uptick in January temperatures as a whole is something that we may have experienced this month, even though we did have that really, really cold stretch of a week. As I pointed out, when you look at the bigger picture, when you look at the balancing act of those two stretches of weather as a whole, this January very well could get back to normal, if not slightly milder than average, in spite of those single-digit temperature readings and even the sub-zero readings that we experienced last week. And part of that has to do with climate change and fits within that framework that we've seen. Overall, though, January hasn't warmed up by quite as much as December, and this year really fit that description and fit that trend, as we had a record-setting December with just a trace of snowfall and temperatures that were essentially 9 degrees above the average mark. So overall, this is in part due to climate change, yes, but there's a lot of factors at play. The jet stream and the day-to-day fluctuations in the weather pattern play a big role in the temperatures that we experience on a day-to-day and a month-to-month basis. So even though this overall bigger trend has played a role, we are also seeing those weather patterns that are taking shape as well. Now, I mentioned El Nino and showed you the latest of the equatorial Pacific waters. These El Nino conditions are expected to continue for the remainder of the winter, and what we call neutral conditions, in other words, not really seeing any strong signs toward warmer waters or colder waters. That's somewhere of a balance between El Nino and La Nina. We are expecting neutral conditions to return later on in the spring, and the estimate is for sometime between April to June for that neutral condition to return. There is fairly high confidence that somewhere in that time frame, about a 75% chance we return to neutral conditions during the spring through the early summer time frame. So we are expected to be impacted by El Nino snow for the remainder of the winter. And what that means for you is milder than normal conditions are expected as we head towards February. And you'll see that in the updated WTOL 11 10-day forecast. Warmer than normal weather conditions are going to be expected. In fact, we're going to creep to the mid to even the upper 40s with above average temperatures likely. And then by April and June, we'll keep an eye on how El Nino turning to more neutral conditions could affect our spring and our summer weather as well. Overall, we're going to have a lot to recap next week. We'll recap January and look ahead to February. If you're not already subscribed, WTOL.com/email. You'll get updated Climate Friday newsletters each and every week. Have a good one.